Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info.
Welcome to Space News. This is Andy Hall, and over the course of the past year, I've been presenting a multi-part series called Eye of the Storm. In Chapter 5, we looked at coronal storms. We looked at the San Rafael Swell and Capitol Reef, as well as Monument Valley and the San Juan River Basin, as sets of dome and crater pairs produced in the eye of the great primordial storm that created the Colorado Plateau. The weather that produced these domes and craters essentially consisted of a thunderstorm producing updraft winds, paired with a cyclone producing a downdraft at its core. Electrically, it formed a ring current between them, with its lower half being currents in the ground. Its upper half consisted of the mesocyclone and cyclone connected by a jet stream wind from updraft to downdraft, forming an arch of condensate. This loop is what would be, under calmer circumstances, the thunderstorm anvil cloud, a layer of positive charge forming the top half of the mesocyclone. But when mesocyclone and cyclone come together in a turbulent, intensely charged climate, the anvil is swept into a filament that feeds the downdraft of the cyclone. The cyclone and mesocyclone then becomes one circuit. This is how fractals grow. Circuits connect together, and pairings become groupings, and groupings become networks, and that is what we see on Jupiter. The Great Red Spot is a network circuit of coronal storm loops. We also looked at direct visual evidence of coronal loops on Jupiter, and they happen to be in almost the exact same pattern in the Great Red Spot as the dome and crater pairs on the Colorado Plateau, because the storm systems are fractal and driven by similar circuitry. Also, like the ground current loops discussed in Chapter 9, these ring currents had DC input from lightning and plasma winds and current junctions with ground, so they could act as op-amps, using the DC current to amplify the ring current. That realization was a pretty good egg, but it gets better. The big Easter egg was finding this type of storm system depicted in ancient art. In fact, it's depicted on the oldest, most controversial, and mysterious megalith ever discovered, the Vulture Stone at Göbekli Tepe. The stone T-pillar depicts arched clouds across the sky or upper portion of the pillar. Yes, the mysterious handbag of the gods. And this is just my theory, of course, but the handbag depicts the box-like shape of mesocyclone seen at a distance, with the arch receding from center to behind, where it downdrafts into an unseen cyclone. A distant viewer would only see a squall line of thunderstorms surrounding the cyclone, with, instead of an anvil cloud, the jet stream to the cyclone arching away, just as it's depicted on the pillars. Note the odd figures above the clouds. I believe these represent the type of thunderstorm discharge we call sprites and gnomes. In a coronal storm, plasma discharges from the cloud tops would not be as rare as they are today, and not that they are all that rare today, but in this past environment, they would have been lit up like Christmas. Above and below the clouds is space patterned in triangles, cut across by a thin layer of rectangles. This represents the triangular pattern of rarefaction and compression in supersonic winds, the narrow layer being a faster jet stream or lenticular layer between conflicting winds, with interference patterns making the box-like segregations. The vulture, or thunderbird, is a stylized representation of the Peratt instability, also known as squatter man, which in rock art is often depicted with a bird's head. It would have presaged the storm, appearing in the sky as an aurora bringing the portent of doom to come. The legless birds also depict aurora that are fractal repetitions, at least in partial image, of the central plasma column. Below the birds in the base of the T are depictions of a wolf representing the howling wind, a salamander representing the tidal floods, and a scorpion, meaning ground-to-ground discharge, depicted as a dragon in other myths. Arrow-headed snakes appear here and there, representing lightning or currents. The T-pillar itself represents earth and heavens, as above, so below. A popular theory about this stone is that it actually depicts a comet or meteor strike, and that's because the bird is holding a ball. Go figure. I like my interpretation better. Göbekli Tepe is dated earlier than 9000 BC, or the time of the Younger Dryas. It's also when Plato said Atlantis disappeared, and it correlates well, all things considered, with the time we recall as Noah's flood, or Gilgamesh, if you prefer. So was this a shrine made by survivors, or did it have utility in surviving the storms? They must have hid underground to survive, for even if they were in a region of calmer winds, radiation, lightning, and fouled water would have surely killed them if they were unprotected. The implication is clear, however. At Göbekli Tepe, as in every ancient myth, there was an electrical storm the likes of which do not appear today, caused by some solar system event. Now the final Easter egg. These handbags are depicted all over the world in ancient stonework. The earliest known depictions are in petroglyphs that can't all be dated but are believed to be from before 9000 BC. The following is an example from Australia. If you read this petroglyph right to left like a storyboard, it first shows a small coronal storm on the right, the rightmost handbag, apparently forming. Next to it is a larger one above streamers rising from the ground. These would be plasma streamers like what forms in a lightning connection, only visible in glow mode. Next, a cloud forms something below, while something else rises to meet it. They look like hoops or semicircles. These would be plasma clouds, reaching to meet, also visible in glow mode. And then there's some kind of squiggly figure, after which the clouds appear again. Never mind the kangaroo. The squiggly figure is the plasma afterglow of a supersized lightning bolt. What I believe this depicts is the cloud, the entire mesocyclone of a thunderstorm, collapsed in a Z-pinch and then reforming. That would be like a hydrogen bomb going off. But I'm pretty sure that's what we're seeing. I wonder if there isn't a large crater a few miles in front of this rock. The entire colloquy is represented in stylized form in the Anunnaki figures in ancient Sumeria, the handbag and the vine of pomegranate that looks like the Australian squiggly figure. They are often holding pine cones, and that's, I think, represents the supersonic winds thrusting forward at the head of the storm and the fractal pattern of rarefaction and compression they would display. In fact, the entire figure represents aspects of the storms, from the bird's head of aurora discharge to the legs flat-footed on the ground, one uncovered and billowing muscle like the winding updraft to a mesocyclone, and the other covered, unable to be seen, like the returning airflow down a cyclone. It's as if the gods, the winged anthropomorphized aurora that presaged the storm, are delivering the storm, presenting handbags of terror, pine cones of destruction, and massive thunderbolts of lightning. It even displays a sense of hierarchy between heavenly and earthly phenomena, as in the gods and demigods endemic to all ancient religions. I know people will disagree, because everyone has a theory about the handbags. Some think they are for a drug stash, as if the ancient gods meant psilocybin all day. And others say they carried pollen, but who collects pollen and why? It makes more sense to me that these figures symbolically commemorate the most earth-shattering event known to man. Whether you agree or not, I want you to understand. The events I described are in our history. They influence us today. We are just confused by liars and lazy thinkers in our midst. From academia to media to politics, science to culture to power, break the bonds of the brainwash they feed us and think for yourself. Do it, and you will find answers. Nature makes itself known. It's up to us to raise our consciousness to its level. Once done, truth is self-evident. At least this is my experience. I have no special talent. I'm just keenly aware of what's around me and eternally curious as to how it got there. Ask the right questions and nature shows the answer. I refer to this feedback circuit as God. I present these conclusions for your consideration. I won't deny other possible answers exist, and we need to consider everything. But there is a bit of urgency in the message I get from all this which I'm compelled to share. Earth's eternal circuits are warming up. Volcanic and seismic activity is increasing all along plate boundaries that define the subsurface currents. Weather has become a bit strange, and at the same time, the sun is entering a minimum period of energy output. Solar minimums have direct correlation with colder weather on Earth, but also higher seismic activity. The Earth has to respond to the change in solar energy by releasing some of its stored energy in order to maintain its balance. A reduction in solar wind means a reduction in energy induced by Earth's magnetic field. With less input energy, internal circuits wane and the magnetic field weakens and expands. But as the magnetic field expands, it captures more solar wind, creating an increased induction. This tug-of-war plays out as Earth tries to keep pace with the sun, but it oscillates Earth's circuitry as currents ebb and flow, creating resistance and heat that has to release. This happens in the transient phases, shifting from maximum to minimum and vice versa. It's the rate of change that matters. We may see dramatic increase in the frequency of earthquakes and volcanoes and severe weather as we go down into the minimum and rise back out. We are also experiencing a magnetic pole shift. The magnetic pole shift is related to changing crustal currents. I don't know how yet, but I know there's feedback between them, because there has to be. It's physics, and it is happening. If there's one thing that should be evident from reading Eye of the Storm, it's that Earth is an electric circuit driven by whatever is in its core. We don't know what the core is. It's not a spinning ball of iron. The surface effects we experience outside of the crust are driven from within as a result of how the core reacts with the solar system. The surface effects are a capacitive reaction to changing energy levels in the core because Earth is a spherical capacitor. Crustal boundaries surround the Indian Ocean, and above segments of these currents are some of the most active volcanic regions, including the Indonesian islands and Madagascar. They are very active right now. These are likely the largest currents on Earth and the closest together, producing magnetic flux between them. There is already a large gyre in the ocean deep off the coast of Madagascar circulating between these currents. Does this mean there are catastrophic storms in our future? I'm damned if I know. Check what the ancients say. All I know is we better get off the dime and understand this Earth as it really is, and stop listening to the academics. Thank you all for reading. Thank you for gracious comments. These articles appear on my website, thedailyplasma.blog, as well as thunderbolts.info, and can be accessed by anyone entirely free. As people wake up to reality, please point them to this content. Thank you very much.